It was December 24th, 1988, Christmas Eve. While families across Arizona were preparing for festive celebrations, the silence of the desert was interrupted by the hum of an ATV. A father and son riding through the rugged terrain near a place called the Superstition Mountains stumbled upon something they would never forget. There, lying on her right side, was the body of a young woman. She was dressed in casual clothing, one shoe still on her foot, no purse, no wallet, and nothing to identify her. Just the tracks of tires nearby and the unmistakable signs of violence etched into her skin. At that moment, nobody could have known her name. Nobody knew she was supposed to be boarding a flight home for the holidays that very same day, to reunite with her family and celebrate Christmas like she always had. She wasn't just a victim. She was someone's sister, someone's daughter, and now she was someone whose life was stolen. Hi everyone, welcome back to True Crime with Kimber. I'm Kimbyrleigha, and if you've never been here before, it's nice to finally meet you. And if you are not subscribed, I usually don't say this, but if you are not, this message is for you, because if you look down right now and you subscribe, the subscribe button should light up. Kind of cool. And if you're already subscribed, thank you so much for your loyalty. And if you have been here before, you know that I like to take a moment to thank our sponsors, but also introduce you to new things that I found and love and I want to share with you. And today is all about being comfortable, cute, and celebrating love. Love is anything you want it to be. I love feeling good and cozy, and that's why I had to try MeUndies, because I heard about them and I heard they were soft as butter, and it's actually true. Whether you're celebrating with a partner, your besties, or you're just indulging in some well-deserved self-love, MeUndies has you covered. Literally. They have the coziest, comfiest, and dare I say even the sexiest undies and loungewear you'll ever own. My favorite part is the matching part. For Valentine's Day, MeUndies has the cutest limited edition prints like electric hearts and lovebirds, so you can actually match with your partner, your friends, or even your pet. Yes, your pet. But you may be wondering, why MeUndies? Well, first of all, there's a style for everyone. Whether you're into sleek, all-black classics or fun, flirty prints, there's something for every vibe. Plus, the sizes, extra small to 4XL, means that you can find your perfect fit. I chose to go with the classic navy feel-free thong, and, well, it does feel like I'm not really wearing anything. It's so comfy. They come in all kinds of cute prints as well. But they go beyond undies. If you love to lounge, MeUndies has joggers, hoodies, and even onesies that feel like a warm hug. And I mean onesies for adults. But they also have styles for kids in undies and pajamas to match. The comfort is the key. And their signature fabric is soft, breathable, and moves with you. So you can stay comfy all day or night. They're for any time, really. I'm taking a flight tomorrow and I'm going to be wearing this feel-free long line bralette. It is so soft and smooth. You can sleep in it, or it looks just great in a t-shirt. Plus, their products are sustainably sourced. They're made with eco-friendly materials and they're risk-free. If you're not obsessed with your first pair, no worries, it is on them. So what's better than you and your person or your pet matching in the softest undies ever? So treat yourself or someone special to that ultimate comfort and find your perfect match. This Valentine's Day, give that gift that always has them thinking of you and get 20% off your first order plus free shipping on orders over $75 at MeUndies.com/Kimber. You can enter promo code Kimber. And thank you so much to MeUndies for making this video possible. A call was put in to the Pinal County 911 at 2 p.m. reporting this discovery, and the sheriffs were quickly called to the scene. They worked meticulously. They combed through every detail out there in this desolate area 10 miles east of Mesa, near the Superstition Mountains, and it seemed to offer no answers. The tire tracks near the body, well, it was unclear where they led, but the bruises, the violence, that spoke to a brutal, calculated murder. But without a wallet, without identification, who was she? For now, she was Jane Doe, another woman stolen from this world and discarded like this, alone, out in the middle of the desert. And here's the thing about deserts. They don't give their secrets up easily. The dry air, the vast emptiness, they have a way of swallowing evidence whole. And there wasn't much to work with, just the haunting image of this young woman who they knew suffered immensely. There she was, lying on her right side with only one shoe on her right foot. It was clear that she had a very severe wound to her neck. There was blood on the dirt nearby. Her clothing was riddled with holes from a sharp object. and bloodstains were all over. On her face, there was also something peculiar, faint, diamond-shaped bruises. What happened to her? Why was she out there, and who was she? The woman's body was transported to the Tucson Medical Examiner's office where more horrors would come to light. Chuck Nagore was the pathologist's assistant at the autopsy, and he recalled opening the body bag and being confronted with this young, beautiful woman with a gaping wound on the left side of her neck. It was very deep, and it wasn't just one cut, it was multiple. It was so severe, it nearly detached her head, and it penetrated through her spine. These were very powerful and intentional strikes, and that's not all. There were 4 stab wounds to her back, 1 to her chest, that went through her heart. The force used broke several of her ribs. But it was what was on her face. I told you, it was very perplexing. It was these bruises on the left side of her head, near her left temple and her left eyebrow, in the shape of a diamond pattern. Now, when they saw this, they figured it must have been from a shoe print, and there were more matching this pattern right next to her body in the dirt. It was as though someone had pressed their foot into her flesh, holding her down to control her from keeping her from getting up or fleeing, and then inflicting these savage wounds. There were actually a tremendous number of bruises on her face and her body. She also had scrapes on her knees and a defensive wound on one of her hands. The brutality of this attack made one thing clear to investigators. Whoever did this, they weren't just angry. It seemed like they were filled with rage. The cause of her death was that deep wound to her neck, multiple stab wounds, and the manner of death was, of course, homicide. But the detectives were at a standstill. Without a name, they couldn't connect this Jane Doe to any missing persons cases. But then a call came in from Mesa Police Department. They informed Pinal detectives that a woman had reported that her sister had been missing since the day before, December 23rd. Her name was Cynthia Monkman, who went by Cindy, and the caller was Kathy, Cindy's younger sister. She explained that Cindy hadn't shown up to a Christmas party that she had planned for the night before Christmas Eve, and that wasn't like Cindy. She was the type to organize everything, to be the life of the party and the center of attention, and when Cindy didn't answer her calls, Kathy grew desperate. She called over and over again, leaving message after message, hoping Cindy would get back in touch, but in her gut, she already knew something was wrong, and there was more. Both Kathy and Cindy were supposed to be taking a flight back home to Illinois on the morning of Christmas Eve, and so Kathy left a note for Cindy with a plane ticket on the counter, and the handwritten message read, "I love you. Don't worry about anything. It's all going to be okay." Kathy hoped and prayed that Cindy would find the note and show up for their 7:30 a.m. flight to Illinois. She clung to the idea that maybe her sister just needed some space. But as Kathy boarded the flight from Phoenix to Illinois alone on December 24th, waiting for Cindy to walk through the airplane door and take a seat next to her, she never did. And that's when her hope started to dwindle. Back in Arizona, the detectives began connecting the dots. A missing woman named Cindy Monkman, a Jane Doe in the desert, and a family desperate for answers. Cindy had disappeared on December 23rd, one day before her body was found. The timeline was tight, but it did fit, and the Jane Doe fit the physical description of Cindy as well. They knew they might have a lead, but would it actually connect? The detectives reached out to Cindy's family for more details, and her sister described Cindy as vibrant, trusting, and someone who had just been through a whirlwind of changes recently. Moving, a new relationship, and actually a sudden marriage to a new man. And then there was, of course, the fact that Cindy had planned to come home for Christmas. She wasn't running away, not from her family, not from her life. This wasn't a disappearance of her own choosing. As the investigators worked to confirm the connection, Kathy and her family's worries deepened, and eventually they determined the body in the desert was Cindy's. Kathy will never forget that call. At that point, the family had all gathered together. There was a Christmas tree decorated in the living room with presents underneath, and the phone rang. Their father, Jack, answered, and they could tell just by the way he looked that it wasn't good news. When he hung up, he told everyone to stand up and hold on to one another, and that's when he let them know that police had recovered Cindy. She wasn't alive. It was shocking. It was devastating. Cindy was the spark in this family, the one who brought everyone together. And the fact that she could be dead didn't make sense. And if you knew Cindy, you would know why. So let me tell you who she was before she was the Jane Doe in the desert. Cindy Monkman's story didn't begin in the Arizona desert. It began decades earlier in a home filled with laughter, sunshine, and the kind of sibling bonds that could weather anything. Cindy Estelle Monkman was born on September 16th of 1958 in Pensacola, Florida, a place where the beaches stretched for miles, the air carried the smell of salt mixed with the sea breeze, and her younger sister, Kathy, was born just 14 months later. And from the start, the two sisters were inseparable. Cindy and Kathy weren't just very close in age, they were best friends. They were the kind of siblings who finished each other's sentences, shared secrets that only they would understand, and even though they hardly looked alike, people would often mistake them for twins, and they loved it. Cindy had a natural charisma that made her stand out, while Kathy brought a quieter, steadier energy, and together they balanced one another perfectly. The Monkman household was a happy one. Their father, Jack, was a psychologist, and their mother, Dorothy, who they called Dottie, stayed home to take care of the two little girls and eventually their younger brother, John. Dottie doted on her children. At the time, life was good. But as every true crime story seems to remind us, good things never last forever. And sadly, devastation hit home for the Monkmans in 1963. Cindy was only 5 years old. Her mother, Dottie, received the kind of news that no one is ever prepared for: breast cancer. She was only 34, and suddenly the sunny days in Florida felt heavier and darker. Jack did his best to keep things together, but his wife's condition worsened, and the family had to make a major decision. They needed to move back to where Dottie called home, Champaign, Illinois. It was thousands of miles away from the coastal paradise, but it offered the support that Dottie desperately needed. So the Monkman family packed up their lives and they headed to the Midwest. Champaign was rural, it was quiet, it was far removed from the life they'd known in Florida. For Cindy and Kathy, it felt like an entirely different world. And sadly, 2 years after Dottie's diagnosis, she passed away. Cindy was just 7 and Kathy 6, and little John was only 3. And I cannot imagine what Jack went through losing his wife and having 3 young children to raise, but he took on the challenge. It's hard to put into words what that kind of loss does to a child, though. How do you understand something as permanent as death when you're barely old enough to tie your own shoes? Cindy, Kathy, and John didn't just lose their mom, they lost the glue that held this family together. The woman that cared for them day in and day out was now gone. But even in the midst of this unimaginable grief, life had to move forward. And Cindy, with her sensitive and outgoing nature, became the kind of person who could find light in even the darkest places, and this tragedy paved the way for that. Cindy had a way of bouncing back from life's blows. She was the kind of person who thrived on connection. She loved being around people. And as she got older, her personality blossomed. She loved being the center of attention, not in a boastful and obnoxious way, but there was just this thing that drew her like a magnet to other people. Even as she grew up, she had this childlike innocence about her and this fun-loving nature. She had this ability to make you feel like the most important person in the room. And she would thrive on the energy she got from others. But there was another side to Cindy too, a sensitivity that made her deeply empathetic. She felt things intensely, both the good and the bad, and that made her someone that people could trust with their secrets and their struggles. As they say, she would listen and not judge, but she truly wouldn't. And it's one of the reasons she made friends so easily and had so many of them. And as she became an adult, she had a very fun-loving side to her. You could actually call her a party girl because she was. She loved to tan, go on road trips, and dance all night with friends. She was gorgeous too. She had this golden brown hair, bright blue eyes, and a perfect smile. She reminds me so much of a young Pamela Anderson. I see it. I don't know if you can, but I'm putting their pictures side by side. So of course her looks would draw people in. But it was truly Cindy's personality that made people stay connected to her. Kathy said, within just 30 minutes of meeting Cindy, she would have a nickname for you. She called Kathy KD and then expanded it to Katie Cool Lady. Cindy was known for her sense of humor. She was always happy and smiling, and she would get you to smile. It was that contagious. Her energy, it was just something that made others happy in her presence. I hope I'm doing my best here to paint a clear picture for you, but luckily, since Cindy loved to be in front of the camera, there are home videos to showcase a lot of this. And if you're watching, I'll be putting them up on the screen, especially a video that actually wasn't made by her, but one from television, because Cindy chased dreams with a kind of passion that most people only wish they could possess. And one of her biggest dreams was to be on the Price is Right TV show. And on April 12, 1984, Cindy finally got her chance. She decided to treat Kathy and their mother Estelle to an experience none of them would ever forget, a live recording of her favorite TV show. She was obsessed. Cindy wasn't just a casual fan. She was dedicated. She watched the show religiously, and when she finally got a chance to be part of the audience, she told her sister and grandmother she wanted more. She didn't just want to be a face in the crowd. She wanted to be a contestant. So she came up with a plan. She dressed to stand out. Big hair, bright colors, and a personality that practically screamed, "Pick me." And guess what? It worked. Cindy's energy and enthusiasm caught the attention of the producers, and before she knew it, she was being called to come on down. For Cindy, this was more than just a TV show. It was her moment. Being on The Price is Right was like stepping into a dream world, and Cindy soaked up every second of it. She played the games, she cheered on her fellow contestants, and she even got to meet her idol at the time, Bob Barker. Kathy would later say it was one of the best memories they ever shared together. That was who Cindy was. Someone who turned every moment into an adventure. Ever notice how many cases, though, have contestants on game shows? I thought that was kind of interesting. I know my husband and I did 3 of them on our other true crime channel, Dark Livity. There was Becky Bleefnick's husband and Sarah Boone, just throwing that out there. I don't know why, it just seems eerie to me. Kathy and Cindy lived together. They did everything together. They would take these impromptu road trips to go visit friends at college. They would go out and drink, party all night. They were definitely living it up, but they were also studying. Cindy took college classes towards a degree in nutrition, and she ultimately began her career by working in schools, teaching kids the importance of eating right, and hoped to further her education to land her dream job and become a dietitian. That chance came when Kathy decided to move from Illinois to Mesa, Arizona in 1980. She was attending nursing school, and the bond between the sisters was so strong that it didn't take long for Cindy to follow her there. Their life in Mesa could only be described as footloose and fancy-free. That is how Kathy put it. And they were 21 and 22 years old. Cindy had no real obligations, no big plans weighing her down. She was just living for the moment, enjoying her independence. And as soon as she got to Mesa, the sisters slipped right back into their familiar rhythm. Nights were spent going out together, dancing, laughing, and soaking up the energy of the city. But it wasn't all about fun. Within just 2 years, Cindy successfully obtained her master's degree in community health education, and she embarked on a career as a dietitian and nutritionist. After years of working hard, Cindy decided it was time for a change. It was 1983, she was now 25, and she thought it was time to get a little more serious. And then when her dream job offer came in to lead up a wellness program at a major corporation in Minneapolis, Minnesota, it was an offer she could not turn down. It did mean that she would be almost 2,000 miles away from Kathy, but it also meant a great salary and getting ahead in her career. But saying goodbye was difficult, especially considering the time. This was before the widespread use of cell phones and the internet. It wasn't even easy to make phone calls this far because we had long distance calling back then, and it was expensive. But clever Cindy came up with a plan. The sisters would record themselves on cassette tapes and then send them back and forth to one another through the mail, kind of like an audio diary. Now, I have some of these recordings. The sisters talk about everything. You can imagine if you have siblings, they talked about work, life, and of course, guys. Cindy wanted to find love. She wanted to get married and have children. And one reoccurring theme in Cindy's cassette chronicles was her preference for falling for the tall, blonde guy, the all-American surfer type. And over time, she felt like Minnesota just wasn't the place for her. It hadn't been what she thought it would be. She missed her sister. She missed the carefree lifestyle they shared when they were younger. And she missed the fun in the sun. So in late 1986, after she had been there for about 3 years, Cindy packed up her life and moved right back to Mesa, Arizona. And she was eager for a fresh start. She settled in a small apartment near Kathy, allowing them to maintain their close friendship and their sisterly bond. And things went back to normal for the pair. As Cindy was out partying, she would of course meet guys, and she had her fair share of flings. But then there was Mark Maurer. or as he was known on the radio, Mark in the Dark. Mark was a DJ on KDKB radio station, and he had this larger-than-life personality. Cindy was just drawn into his charisma, the way he commanded attention with his charm and his humor, and they just clicked. And soon, they were officially dating. And the relationship was a lot of fun. It was full of late-night partying, high-energy adventures, and that usually consisted of excessive drinking. And most of us know when you mix alcohol with emotions running high, it can lead to some toxic outcomes. The relationship was a mixture. It was up one minute, down the next, and Mark, he was like a local celebrity. It was a lot to keep up with. As thrilling as it was, Cindy began to feel like something was missing in her life. She was approaching her 30s, and she was realizing that the party lifestyle wasn't sustainable. She wanted more stability, commitment, a real partner to share her life with. As much as she enjoyed Mark's company and all the fun she was having, she knew that deep down, he wasn't the one for her. Cindy was watching all of her friends get married and settle down, and she didn't want to be a bridesmaid forever. She and Mark were together for about a year until Cindy broke it off over the phone. It was in July of 1988, after they'd been giving each other some space for a little while so she could decide what she wanted to do. Now, she actually recorded this conversation for her own audio diary and nothing else. It's not all the time we have evidence of a victim saying things in their own words, so let's listen to a portion of this breakup call right now.
I miss you very deeply. Well, I miss you too, Mark. But you don't know I love you just a lot. How do you feel about me? I still care about you, and I still love you, but I think that we're on a different wavelength right now, and it's silly for you to try to force to be somebody you're not. I feel like I really want to be on this track to taking better care of myself, and I've been doing really good with it.
You can tell that Mark still had very strong feelings for Cindy. He missed her. He said he still loved her. But as Cindy said, she wanted different things. A month later, Cindy met with her family out at their family vacation home called the Monkey Spoon. It was a little cottage on the Maine coast. They'd been going there about every summer since the early 1970s, and they even made matching t-shirts with the logo of the cottage on them and home videos to capture every special moment together. As happy as Cindy seemed, Kathy could tell underneath all of her smiles and her laughter, she was depressed on this trip, and she felt lost. Cindy knew her well enough to just be able to sense it. I mean, she did just go through a breakup, and she loved Mark. She just knew that he wasn't husband material, and Kathy hoped that Cindy would get through the heartbreak. And it wasn't long until another handsome guy swept her off her feet and made her forget all about Mark. A few months later, on October 8th, Cindy and Kathy were invited to a night out by a friend, Annette Clay. She brought them to Bobby McGee's, a popular, trendy nightclub in Mesa. Kathy actually referred to it as a meat market. Lots of hot guys, good music, flashing lights. It was a lot of fun. They were there to meet up with a couple guys that Annette met there a few days prior, Michael and Rudy Appels. They were brothers, visiting from Dusseldorf, Germany, and right away, when Annette introduced the girls to the brothers, Michael and Cindy just seemed drawn to one another. Michael was tall, he was blonde, we know she has a thing for blondes, he was 6'7", and he towered over everyone in the room except maybe his brother, who was almost as tall, yet a bit stockier. The two of them walked in wearing tuxedos, so that definitely made them stand out. They looked like they stepped right off the pages of a magazine. Michael was very flashy. He had pierced ears, a gold chain around his neck, rings on his fingers, and Cindy didn't hesitate to connect with him. Michael was, by all accounts, the definition of Cindy's dream guy. He had striking blonde hair, a confident demeanor, and his brother Rudy was just as well dressed. He was wearing a perfectly tailored suit. And together, they just had this air of sophistication and mystery that was impossible to ignore, especially with their German accents. Cindy and Michael danced all night. They were wrapped in each other's arms, even kissing and gazing into each other's eyes. And Kathy could tell Michael was charming, attentive, and seemed captivated by her sister. And it looked like Cindy felt the same way about Michael. What Cindy had gathered from their short evening together was that Michael was the youngest of 7 siblings. He was 5 years younger than she was at 25 years old, and he and his brother were there on business. The thing is, neither Rudy nor Michael spoke fluent English, so communication was not that easy, but I guess they made up for it with their looks. After the club, Annette, Kathy, and Cindy went out to breakfast, and the conversation went right to the guys. Annette was really into Rudy, and Cindy was, of course, into Michael, and she went on and on about his good looks, how he made her feel like she was the only person in the room. Cindy said he even told her several times that she was the woman he wanted to marry, but in his accent, he said, "Me, you marry." Maybe that's normal in Germany, but it was a little too much. As soon as Kathy heard this, she was kind of like, "Oh my gosh, stop it." To which Cindy told her not to burst her bubble because she was having fun just taking it all in. Now, they say the best way to get over heartbreak is with a new love interest, right? And that seemed to be what Cindy was doing. Annette and Cindy started to go out on double dates with the brothers, and Cindy learned more about them. Rudy was employed in international banking, and Michael did IT work for large corporations, and they were in the United States for business on work visas, and they were currently staying at the local Holiday Inn. Over the next couple weeks, Annette and Cindy spent a lot of time with the Appels brothers, going out multiple times a week, and eventually, both women got more serious with the men, and each offered their respective new foreign partner a place to live. Rudy moved in with Annette, and Michael moved in with Cindy. Was it fast? Yes, very fast. Cindy even called it a whirlwind to her sister. But Kathy was a little bit worried. After all, Cindy just left a guy who was all about the nightlife, and it seemed like she was replacing him with the same type of guy. But Cindy wasn't the type of person to be swayed once she had her mind set on something. So let's fast forward to December 17th. Cindy attended the wedding of a close friend named Linda Smith out in Point Tapatipo Resort in Phoenix. Now, Cindy and Linda met at Arizona State, and this time she brought along Michael as her date when they met up. I mean, it was a wedding after all. The friends were catching up, and that's when Linda looked down and she noticed a ring on Cindy's finger, and she was like, "Oh my God, you got engaged?" And Cindy, she surprised Linda by saying, "No, I got married." Linda was like, "What?" But she was so happy for Cindy because she could tell that Cindy had truly found the love of her life. This was about a week before Cindy was last seen, and everything seemed to be falling into place. And it wasn't long before Cindy confided in her sister Kathy that she and Michael actually did get married. It was a secret ceremony in Las Vegas back on October 28th, so it was only a few weeks after they met. Now, this was the first time there was ever a secret between these sisters. Kathy could not believe that Cindy had taken a flight, she was gone for 2 days, got married, all without her ever knowing. It left Kathy surprised, hurt, but also intrigued. Cindy was pretty spontaneous, so it kind of did make perfect sense. But what didn't make sense was why Cindy was found dead not too long after all this. Everything had seemed so normal. The pair had planned this trip to fly back home to Illinois for Christmas, and they were excited to spend some quality time together. And that's because Michael had to fly back to Germany to see his mom. So Kathy felt like this would be a perfect opportunity for her and her sister to have one-on-one time. That way she could delve deeper into the spur-of-the-moment marriage and just connect like old times. But as we know, Kathy never got that chance because Cindy never got on that plane. On December 23rd, the day before they were supposed to leave, Cindy had planned a dinner party with Annette and another one of their friends, Maria. They were going to meet at 8 p.m. to exchange gifts. Cindy called her father that night. She also called Maria at 7 just to confirm she was coming to pick her up at 7:45. But Cindy never showed up, and she wasn't home either. It was like she just disappeared. Now that you have a complete picture of what Cindy's family told investigators, let's go back to the crime scene. The clues were limited, but they were enough to start painting a picture. The tire tracks near the body suggested that Cindy had been driven out to the desert, and I know we could have probably guessed that, but this wasn't Cindy just wandering aimlessly and then killed. No, the location was chosen. The killer had made a deliberate effort to leave her in this isolated spot where they thought no one would find her, at least not for a long time, if ever. Detectives couldn't ignore the possibility that the violence inflicted on her could be personal. These injuries that were so extensive, they rarely come from a random act. This wasn't the work of someone who probably just snapped. It seemed more intimate, as though the killer had a relationship with her. The deliberate slashing of her throat and the extent of her injuries suggested something way more deep and sinister. It wasn't like a robbery gone wrong out in the middle of this desert. It was calculated. So far, all they had were the tire marks, although only 2 were clear enough to be of any use to them. They had shoe prints, a piece of nylon cord nearby, and a blood-soaked beach towel next to where Cindy was found. These items were collected for analysis, and investigators go back to interviewing Cindy's family and those closest to her, and they ask if they can provide any information about the things that may have seemed suspicious in the weeks leading up to her murder. Kathy is the first to admit she was worried about Cindy because of her ex-boyfriend, Mike Maurer. Now, you see, there was another reason Cindy broke it off with him. She found out that one of Mark's ex-girlfriends had been found murdered, and that case was still unsolved, and this freaked Cindy out. She just couldn't stop thinking about this possibility that she could be in danger. So Kathy felt better knowing that Cindy had broken up with Mark, but he had re-entered her life only days before she was found murdered too. In truth, Cindy confided in Kathy 3 days before her flight home to Illinois on December 21st that during a lapse in judgment, Cindy reached out to Mark. Maybe it was the holiday spirit, maybe because now she was married, she felt okay reconnecting because she knew she wasn't available. And maybe it was just a friendly, hello, how are you? But the conversation turned heated when she told Mark that she married Michael. It was so soon after they broke up. He couldn't believe it. He was furious. But by the end of their talk, Mark calmed down. And he told Cindy that he was actually going to be in town for Christmas. And he said, why don't we meet up? Cindy told Kathy she was thinking about it, despite being now with Michael, because she still had lingering feelings for Mark. Kathy couldn't help but think that Mark could have done this to her in a fit of rage. It's what led her to reach out to Michael after Cindy failed to show up for that dinner party that she had planned. Kathy called the apartment that Michael and Cindy shared and left numerous messages for both Cindy and her husband, telling Michael to please call her back as soon as she could. Now, they were playing phone tag. They were both calling each other back and forth, leaving messages on each other's answering machines until Michael finally connected with Kathy at about 2 a.m. And as soon as she picked up, he was screaming. He was like, where is Cindy? And that's exactly what Kathy wanted to know. It didn't take long for Kathy to realize that Michael was drunk. He was slurring his words and not really providing any useful information, especially with the language barrier. Kathy managed to be able to understand that Cindy had apparently abruptly left the apartment after she received a heated phone call from another man. All Kathy could make out was that the guy on the other line sounded angry to Michael. At this point, Kathy hung up with Michael and she calls Annette because Annette knew Michael better than she did. Remember, she was hanging out doing double dates. So Kathy asked Annette, please go over there to the apartment and try to ask Michael details about the last time he saw her sister. So she did. Annette was able to relay to Kathy that Michael was actually passed out when she got there. He was just snoring away on the couch. So Annette let herself into the apartment. Michael finally told Annette that Cindy stormed out, telling him she needed to sort things out with someone and she would connect with Michael later for drinks and maybe some food at Bobby McGee's. She was going to meet up with Michael, his brother, and a female friend, Anka Dorn, at 10:30 p.m. after Cindy was finished with her meeting, the dinner that she planned with friends, but she never showed up. When Kathy heard all this, her very first thought was, it's Mark. He was supposed to come into town from California. She'd probably run off with him. She's on a bender with Mark, and she just doesn't understand why Cindy wouldn't have told her any of this. While Annette is still at the apartment with Michael, she called the police and reported Cindy as missing. It was now 3 o'clock in the morning, and Kathy went over there to meet them. The officers took a statement from all 3 of them, and they reiterated everything I just told you. Annette also noticed at that point that Cindy's purse was still there, as well as her keys. And that raised a red flag because who leaves their purse and keys behind? Unless maybe they thought they were just stepping outside, or they weren't planning to go very far, or they were getting a ride with someone that they knew. Kathy said Mark was the only person she could think of that her sister would have run out of the house like that for, if in fact that's what happened. This is when Kathy left a note on the counter with the plane ticket just in case her sister made it back home before their flight. Meanwhile, investigators are trying to track down Mark, and Kathy finally calls her family at 5 a.m. and told them what was going on, that Cindy had been declared a missing person and her face was now all over the news. It was hard for them to believe. Cindy had just mailed her father and her stepmom a letter for the holidays, talking all about her job and also about Michael, that they were getting along really well, and she wished that he would be able to meet them. She even included a wish list of items she wanted for Christmas, and it seemed surreal. They'd also just spoken to her the night before when she broke the news that she and Michael were, in fact, married. Now, she did this on the advice of Kathy, who said she better let them know before they all got there. All of this was going on before the 911 call came in and Cindy's body was found. Later that morning, around 8:45 a.m., Detective Ron Davis from Mesa PD was sent out to Cindy's apartment at Crestwood Apartment Complex in Unit 117 to speak with Michael. Now, even though this Detective Davis, his department usually handled shoplifters, theft, and burglaries, he was specifically sent over because he was fluent in German. He could speak it and he could write it. And since Michael had limited English language skills, the department wanted to get someone in there who could gather way more detailed information. So Detective Davis and the other detectives there knocked on the door to the apartment several times before Michael finally answered. And when he did, and Davis introduced himself in German, Michael was very surprised that someone in the local law enforcement agency actually spoke his language. Now, Davis wanted to create a timeline of Cindy's last movements, and Michael explained that December 23rd was a very busy day. Cindy's Volkswagen Bug needed maintenance, so Cindy and Michael drove it to the dealer for some repairs, and they rented a Subaru and drove it back to their apartment. And for the rest of the day, Cindy was busy getting ready to leave the next morning for Illinois with her sister Kathy. She was also planning that dinner with friends. He said they made plans to have drinks around 10 p.m. at Bobby McGee's with his brother Rudy and friend Anka. But about 7 p.m., while Michael's taking a shower and getting ready, he said Cindy receives a phone call. Michael described the call as a heated discussion. It was intense and it was emotionally charged, but he did not know who was on the other end of that call. After Cindy hung up, Michael described the events that followed. He said that Cindy turned to him abruptly and she said, "I need to take care of something," and she just left. She did not take her keys or her purse with her at that time, and hours went by with no word from her. So he expected, at the very least, she would make it to Bobby McGee's that night, but she never showed up. So now he's upset that she's out with another guy, and Michael and the group decide to get some food. And they were reserving a spot for Cindy this whole time in case she showed up, but she never did. So then they proceeded to go to another bar for drinks, and by the time Michael got home, he was highly intoxicated and he passed out. That's why he was missing all the phone calls back and forth with Kathy. Now, Michael allowed detectives to search the apartment and the vehicle he was driving, and during the search, he provided them with a receipt from Bobby McGee's, and it was dated for December 23rd of 1988 and had Michael's signature on it, so that checked out. Detectives were there all day interviewing Michael, doing a cursory search, and writing reports. There were many messages on that answering machine from Annette, Kathy, Maria, all who were worried because Cindy failed to show up for that dinner or call Kathy as planned. Now, when the detectives are playing these answering machine messages, they find one from Mark. Yes. And it was that morning. Now, still, this was before the 911 call came in, and this message, it's quite eerie in hindsight. But Mark says, "Hey, Sin, it's Mark in California. There's reports that you've been reported missing or whatever." And he says he's in Palm Springs and that the local time is 10 a.m., which means it was 11 a.m. in Arizona at that time. Now, this was before daylight savings. So in case you're doing the math, that's why. So let's listen to this message now.
If I say it's Mark, California, there's reports that you reported missing or whatever. I'm in Palm Springs now. Time now. It's about 10 a.m. local time. Please give me a call.
I don't know what you were thinking after hearing that, but how did he know that her face was all over the news? I can't imagine that the news traveled that fast from 3 a.m. to 11 a.m. across state lines to other news stations, but I was thinking maybe someone local to Arizona told him his ex-girlfriend was on the news, or he was leaving this message as an alibi, and he was involved. Now, that's what Kathy was thinking. It's only a 4-hour drive between Palm Springs and Mesa, Arizona. So if Michael's times were correct and Cindy had left at 7 p.m. the night before, that was more than enough time for Mark to do something to her and drive back in time to make this call before her body was even found. And maybe the killer never thought she would be found. Just a couple hours later, that father and son stumbled upon her body in the desert. So this brings you full circle. Now you know all the facts that the investigators had up to this point when Cindy was identified. They notified her family, as I told you, and then they requested that Michael, his brother Rudy, and their friend Anka came down to the police station, where they proceeded to notify Michael that his wife had been found deceased. The devastating news immediately evoked this strong emotional response from Michael. He became visibly distraught. He was overwhelmed by grief. He was crying, and he was even yelling. He was screaming, "Why? Why her? Why me?" He was in disbelief that this had happened, and I'm sure this would be an emotionally charged and very shocking moment for any loved one. But as you know, in any murder case, it's important to start investigating as soon as possible. So once everyone had calmed down, investigators put the brothers and their friend in separate rooms to speak with them individually and to gather their alibis to eliminate them. They also wanted any information they could provide about when they saw Cindy last. Both Anka and Rudy corroborated Michael's information. They said they saw Cindy leaving the apartment at 7 p.m. as they were arriving to meet up with them, at which point Cindy promised to meet them at Bobby McGee's later. By now, crime scene investigators had collected the tire impressions, the shoe prints, which investigators believe match Reebok tennis shoes, and they were looking at shoes worn by Michael, Anka, and Rudy, and none of them were a match. And when they asked all of them if they owned tennis shoes like this, they all said no. Now, an extra step was that the detectives requested their saliva and also samples of their hair, because they were thinking that maybe there could be DNA at the crime scene that this could be matched to. The brothers, they cooperated, they provided all the requested samples, and their willingness to aid in this investigation was noted, and they were sent home to finally grieve Cindy's loss. Now, anyone close to the victim has to be eliminated, and their only person of interest at this time was Mark Maurer, since Michael's alibi checked out, and the brothers, and also their friend Anka. Now, they were all regulars at Bobby McGee's, and the staff recalled the brothers and Anka were there on December 23rd. Now, lead investigator Mark Jones jumped on the plane to California to speak with Mark Maurer. What no one knew is that while Kathy was in Illinois with her family, her phone back in Arizona was ringing off the hook, and it was Mark calling again and again. And he actually left messages on her answering machine. He wanted to know what was going on.
Kathy, this is Mark Maurer. I'd like you to give me a call back ASAP. I would like to know what the hell is going on.
Once Detective Jones tracked Mark down, he was able to confirm that Mark was working on the day of the murder. Then he rented a car later that day and he drove from LA to Palm Springs to be with his mom and his sister for Christmas. His alibi checked out too. So whatever role he might have played in Cindy's life, it was now clear that he hadn't played one in her death. This had them back at square one, and Cindy's family was preparing to lay her to rest. Her body was flown out to Illinois, where they planned a funeral for December 31st, and then a burial right next to her mom, Dottie. Michael, Rudy, and Anka flew to Illinois together. Michael wanted to speak at the service as well, and he got up to the podium. And that's when he just had an emotional breakdown in front of everyone. He couldn't speak. He was just wailing, and Rudy had to physically pull him away. And then he turned to the crowd and he did his best to apologize on behalf of his brother, who was too distraught to even say a word. Then they made their way to the cemetery. Michael was driving a rental car that they got. Rudy was in the passenger seat and Anka was in the back of the car. And Kathy's car had passed them. And as she looked over, she actually saw them laughing out loud. They were all smiles and giggles over what? She was wondering. She thought that was really weird, and it made her feel very uncomfortable. And I know what some people may be thinking, and I was too. It just popped in my head. People grieve in different ways. So maybe they were reminiscing over the good times that they'd shared. But on the other hand, there's a time and a place, right? And speaking of time and place, right after the funeral was over, the investigators wanted to fly Kathy all the way back to Mesa for just one day. And they did that, and they grilled her for hours about Every single person in her sister's life, including these two German brothers, who were some of the newest people around Cindy. I'm just going to say it. You're probably thinking it too. Michael stood out. The whirlwind romance, the rushed Vegas wedding, the peculiar behavior in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. Actually, I haven't mentioned that yet. I haven't told you about that. Well, when Kathy's going deeper and being asked if maybe there was any red flags other than the whole relationship progressing so quickly, she remembered something. In the midst of Michael's charm, there were just these small moments that didn't quite add up. For starters, he and Rudy claimed to be staying at the Holiday Inn. Remember that? But every time Cindy and Annette wanted to meet them in the room, they would just avoid the topic. Their backstories about being in Mesa for business, it was vague. They wouldn't tell them exactly what companies they were working for. And it was also pretty inconsistent. It felt like they were being really secretive about their lives. Cindy and Annette couldn't shake their curiosity, so they decided to follow the brothers after one of their outings at Bobby McGee's. Michael and Rudy made their way to the Holiday Inn Hotel. But then, as Cindy and Annette are watching from across the street, they saw them leave this hotel through the back door. So again, they're following them, keeping a safe distance not to alert them that they're on their tail. And to their surprise, the brothers cross the street. They walk to a Motel 6. And I'm just going to say this. So what? Maybe they couldn't really afford the Holiday Inn, but wait a minute, that would be kind of odd considering their flashy appearance. Why would these two wealthy, sophisticated men be staying at such a modest motel? So Cindy and Annette, they were determined to get answers. They managed to persuade the motel clerk to give them Michael and Rudy's room number. When they knocked on the door, they were shocked because a woman answered, and she was also German. And when they asked, who are you? She's like, I'm Anka Dorn. I'm a family friend of the brothers. Well, Cindy and Annette had already invested a pretty good amount of time in these guys, and they wanted answers. So they actually pushed this lady aside. They go into the room looking for signs that Michael and Rudy were staying there, but the brothers were nowhere to be found. However, they saw their watches they had been wearing, the shoes that they knew were theirs. So they knew they must have been there at one point, but Anka insisted, no, they're not here now. This entire situation was bizarre, and it actually didn't end there. Cindy started to think back a few nights before this. After the brothers were over at her apartment, she could have sworn she was missing over $100 in cash after they left. And Cindy could not wait to confront Michael. She talked to him about it the very next day, and when she did, he was furious. He told her that her and Annette's little snooping that they went on had led to them losing their high security clearance, resulting in the termination of their jobs and their work visas. And as a consequence, they were now not able to access their money, and now they had nowhere to go. Oh, and about Anka, they explained that she was a family friend whose husband was in the hospital, so they were just helping her out and letting her stay with them. Well, Cindy and Annette were apologetic, and they actually suggested various ways they could try to help them get their jobs back or find them new jobs, but the brothers refused any of these suggestions. Finally, in frustration, Annette was like, what do you want us to do? Marry you? And to their surprise, the Appel brothers replied, yeah. They were serious. It's not that uncommon for people from other countries to marry for citizenship. And though it didn't happen right then and there, feeling guilty for what she believed was her role in his troubles, this is when Cindy invited Michael to move in with her, and Annette did the same thing for Rudy. So if you're wondering, that's the more to the story I didn't tell you at the time. And then Annette discussed the possibility of a sham marriage to Rudy so that he can work in the United States, but Rudy insisted he was in love with her, and if they got married, it would be forever. It would be a real wedding. But he also insisted they would have to keep the marriage secret, and that didn't really make sense, and it didn't sit well with Annette. Meanwhile, within a week or so of Michael moving in with Cindy, he told her he would be forced to go back to Germany unless they got married. The idea of losing him so soon was not something Cindy wanted to go through. And in the mix of her excitement and nervousness, she agreed. So this is what led to their secret ceremony in Vegas. So it wasn't really a fairy tale. It was a marriage of convenience out of guilt, passion, and the thrill Cindy felt in this honeymoon stage. Well, things didn't go so well with Annette and Rudy, though. He had been staying with Annette less than a week when she discovered that the story regarding Anka, remember her, that was a lie. She wasn't a family friend. She was actually Michael's ex-girlfriend. Cindy's Michael, as in her new husband. And Rudy was married. Apparently, they had all come to the U.S. together. Rudy and his wife, they weren't getting along, so she flew back. And then Michael and Anka broke up, but she was still hanging around with no way to get back to Germany. Well, when Annette and Cindy discussed all of this, they decided it was best if Rudy and Anka left and went back home. That is why Cindy actually paid for their flights. That was weeks before Cindy was found dead. Annette never saw Rudy again, and Cindy was obviously under the impression that they had left the country, that Anka and Rudy were gone. But we now know that must not have been true. When investigators informed Kathy that Rudy and Anka had told them they had dinner plans with Cindy on December 23rd, she was shocked and confused. Kathy spoke to Cindy every single day. She was under the impression that Rudy and Anka had flown out to Germany, and Michael was going to join them soon to celebrate the holidays. When Kathy spoke to Cindy that morning, she never mentioned any plans for dinner except the ones she made with her friends. And had Rudy and Anka come back into town, she's like, trust me, I would have known, because Cindy would have certainly mentioned that. We're talking about Michael's ex. You don't think that Cindy's going to confide in her sister that they're back from Germany? It was very suspicious. And okay, this is a lot of drama, yes, but marriages do end, people break up, and by all accounts, Cindy and Michael had a really good relationship. Investigators even found Cindy's diary, and her last entry from November 11th read, quote, I feel like everyone would think that I've gone batty if they knew the whole story. And when I'm with Michael, it feels so right that we're together. He's so good to me. And although he has some faults, I feel like he's a great person for me. I'm still a little bit paranoid about trusting another man, yet he proves himself time and time again. So how do I let go of worrying about everything and just enjoy the relationship? End quote. So now you know Cindy's mindset. She had been burned before in relationships, but she wanted to give Michael a shot. But there were still unanswered questions like why Rudy and Anka never left the United States. And there was also one glaring problem. No physical evidence tied anyone to this crime. No DNA, no fingerprints, nothing that could point detectives to the killer, because none of that was left behind at the scene. The tire tracks near Cindy's body were the best lead that they had, but they didn't yet have a vehicle to match them to. While Michael, Rudy, and Anka were on their way back to Arizona from Illinois after Cindy's funeral, the investigators tracked down that rented Subaru that Michael had since returned. They put ink on the tires and they rolled it on a piece of special paper to compare them to the ones at the scene, but they were not a match. They even luminoled the trunk, and still nothing. But before they could dig deeper, Michael actually contacts Detective Ron Davis on January 3rd. He was back in town, and he left a message frantically explaining that when he got back to the apartment, there was a threatening message left on Cindy's answering machine. But since Michael was not fluent in English, he couldn't understand what the man was saying. Ron Davis was the German-speaking detective. Michael wanted him to translate, so he quickly called Michael back and told him, do not erase the tape. Bring it to the station. And the very next day on January 4th, Michael did just that. He went to Mesa PD, and Detective Davis listened to this message over and over again. And guess what? I'm going to give you a second to stop whatever you're doing and to really concentrate. Listen to everything and anything you notice about the caller's voice, the tone, the context, everything. You ready? Here goes.
Hear what I have to talk. I have cut through the throat of your wife, and I stab and more frequently in the stomach and the back with a knife. If I don't get my stuff, your girlfriend is the next, and then your brother. At last, it is you. Do it now. If not, you see what happens. My eyes are everywhere.
Okay, now hold on to that information and all of your thoughts. It's clear to Detective Davis, the person that left this message is saying that he killed Cindy, and if Michael didn't give him his stuff, whether that's money, drugs, whatever, he was going to kill Anka, Rudy, and then Michael until he complied. And that is threatening. But I don't know if you noticed that it sounded like the person was reading from a script. It didn't seem natural. And if you were threatening someone, maybe you would say boldly, like, I'm going to kill you. And even the way he described what he claimed to have done to Cindy, sure, it is what happened. She was stabbed in the back and front and on her throat. But he said, I have cut through your throat of your wife, and I stabbed her more frequently in the stomach and the back with a knife. That doesn't flow. It's not how someone would normally speak. Well, someone that's first language is English anyway. So now, Davis already picked up on this almost right away. This was a translation. Meaning, when Detective Davis took the words from this message, translated them back into German, it actually made perfect sense. So I went ahead, because I'm not German, and first I plugged it into Google Translate from English to German, and of course I got a whole paragraph in German. Then I plugged it back from German to English, and sure enough, guess what it said? It said, listen to what I have to say. I cut your wife's throat and repeatedly stabbed her in the stomach and back with a knife. If I don't get my stuff, your girlfriend comes next, then your brother, and you come last. Do it now. If not, see what happens. My eyes are everywhere. Well, this last part, my eyes are everywhere, when translated to German, it's actually a German idiom. Now, we have them in English: break a leg, bite the bullet, spill the beans. It translates to I'm all seeing. Now, I'll have Google actually say it to you in German. Ready? Here goes.
Meine Augen sind überall.
Well, there were 3 Germans in question: Michael, Rudy, and Anka. And this was a link that they were involved. I mean, some random killer isn't going to use German phrases like that. This is not common in English. We don't have the same phrase. Davis thought that they may flee the country and that this was some kind of diversion, and he didn't want to tip them off. He needed to dig deeper, so he put 24-hour surveillance on Cindy's apartment. That night of January 5th, 11 officers were deployed around the apartment complex at 5:30 p.m., and shortly after 8:30 p.m., an undercover officer knocked on the door to make sure that Michael, Rudy, and Anka were there. And when Michael answered, the officer asked him for a fake person. He's just trying to see, like, are the people inside the apartment? And Michael told him, oh, you have the wrong unit. Immediately after this, though, guess what happens? Michael calls the police station, and he reports, in his words, that 2 tall black men had just appeared at their front door and threatened them. More lies. But Davis again wanted to use this to get closer to these brothers, so he told them he was really worried about their safety. They needed to come down to the station the next day to make a composite sketch of these men that they saw. So all 3 of them come down. They put the brothers in separate rooms. Michael's description to the sketch artist was of a young black man with expensive sunglasses wearing a suit. And there's Davis looking at this picture, and he's thinking, this looks like one of the main actors for Miami Vice, which just happened to be one of the brothers' favorite TV shows. So they were really trying to pull a fast one on these officers. Well, now they're being interviewed for hours, and the detectives were turning up the heat, especially on Michael, but he's sitting there saying, this is a joke. I'm not involved. He denied having anything to do with his wife's murder. But that's the thing. He kept saying, my wife, but never Cindy. He wasn't using her name. And this is a distancing tactic. It's to separate yourself from the victim. Another sign that he was involved. All the while, Anka is in the waiting area being watched. Detective Jones was waiting for a sign that she was going to break. And she takes her head. She puts it between her legs. She bends over, hanging her head down like she's going to throw up. And that was the signal. He grabbed her, he puts her in an interview room, and he begins to press her. And at first, she's defensive. She insisted she knew nothing about Cindy's murder, but the detectives were not convinced. And meanwhile, they were using this time, while all of them were in these rooms getting interviewed, to try to think of a motive. Because what reason would Michael have to kill Cindy? She just married him so he could stay in the United States. So they begin showing Anka photos of Cindy's brutalized body. Now, this is shocking. It's a grim tactic, but you know what? It worked. Anka broke down. Her composure shattered under the weight of what she knew and was holding back this entire time. She admitted that Michael and Rudy had been targeting women like Cindy from the moment they arrived in the U.S. She explained that a few months ago, back in August of 1988, Michael, Rudy's wife Suzanne, and Anka, who's actually Michael's girlfriend, traveled to San Diego, California with the intention of finding a woman that Michael could convince to marry him so that he could obtain citizenship. First, they met 2 women in a nightclub, Cheryl Rubenstein and Trudy Waters, and they actually lived in Phoenix. and they were in San Diego just catering a party for Cheryl's brother at the time. So they're sitting there spending the evening chatting with the brothers. And because Michael's English wasn't very good and Rudy's was even worse, communication was really hard until they found another patron at the bar to just translate for them. The brothers at first claimed to be windsurfboard manufacturers and then Mercedes importers. And before leaving, these women, who were charmed by them at the time, they gave them their addresses and phone numbers. And 2 weeks later, Anka and the brothers flew to Phoenix. This is how they ended up in Arizona. Cheryl picked them up from the airport, took them to the Holiday Inn in Mesa, and they soon moved to that nearby Motel 6. But all the while, they pretended to be staying at the Holiday Inn, which was more expensive. At which point, Suzanne, which is Rudy's wife, returns to Germany. Because you know why? The con worked better without women around. So Anka would hide out as well, and Suzanne just left. So over the next month, the brothers met and conned a series of women, pretending they were wealthy, and the goal was to get money and to get citizenship. And it was on October 6th, the brothers met Annette Clay. Now, this is Cindy's friend. They met her at Bobby McGee's bar. They were purposely wearing gold and diamonds. They were crafting this illusion of wealth and sophistication, all in an effort to lure in vulnerable women. Now, Cindy, with her trusting nature and the dream of finding love, she had been the perfect target. But Anka told detectives that Cindy wasn't even the brothers' first choice. They had tried to manipulate many other women, but Cindy had fallen for Michael's charm. And once he had her trust, the plan was set into motion. As soon as he convinced her to marry him, Michael began gaining access to Cindy's funds. Poor Cindy worked 2 part-time jobs, her income was modest, and she was doing her best to save for her future. And there's Michael, spending like crazy between October and December. He withdrew over $4,000 from her bank account. It was pure greed. All the while, he's buying Anka, his girlfriend, and Rudy, his brother, whatever they want, shopping sprees all the time while Cindy is working. And it is such a shame. But still, Anka's not admitting anything about a murder. But now, the detectives believe the motive was financial, and they told Anka that if she didn't tell them the truth, they were going to charge her with murder, just like they were going to plan to charge the brothers. So she eventually kept talking. Apparently, once Michael had a taste of the good life, he came up with a very twisted plan. He told Anka that if he took out an insurance policy on Cindy and she died an unnatural death, he would be rich. By this time, Cindy's bank account was dwindling, and Michael just saw an opportunity to become a millionaire. He just had to convince Cindy. On November 7th, less than 2 weeks since they had gotten married at Michael's suggestion, he and Cindy consulted an insurance agent named Doug Ramsey. They wanted to know about $1 million life insurance policy. I know you have a lot of questions, and I'll answer one of them. Cindy was led to believe that Michael was wealthy, that he was just waiting for all of his overseas bank accounts to be transferred to the U.S., and he told her that purchasing large insurance policies was customary. They were investments for couples back in Germany. More lies. But he said it was for their future children, just in case anything were to happen to them. And she went along with it. Now, it's easy to look back and wonder, how did Cindy miss the warning signs? The inconsistencies in Michael's story, the evasiveness about things like his living situation, the whirlwind nature of their relationship. But love has a way of blinding us to the truth. Cindy wasn't naive. She was hopeful, and that hope led her down a path that she could have never imagined. Many of us know about insurance schemes because we watch true crime, but it's not always obvious, especially not back then. However, the agent informed them they could not get such a large policy, but they may be able to qualify for a $400,000 policy. So they filled out the application, and Cindy wrote a check for the first month's premium. It wasn't cheap. It was about the same amount as 1 month of her rent. The average at that time was about $250, and that's about $700 today. Right after this, and all the way up to the time of Cindy's killing, the brothers and Anka were going on shopping sprees, and they were also looking for items for future purchases. They looked at expensive Piaget watches, Rolex watches, and at one time, they made a deal to buy 3 of them for a total of about $130,000. That is insane for me to think that they actually plan to end a person's life for material things like this. It is just sick a watch. They even looked at expensive boats and cars, and they told the dealer they were going to buy 2 Jaguars for $144,000 and 2 Toyota Supras for about $66,000. Why would they even need 4 luxury cars? It's pathetic. What they would do is they would even fill out these purchase contracts and they would make a small down payment with assurances that they would come back and pay more cash later when all their funds came in from Germany, but they would just never return. Now, there are people who do this. It's called window shopping. They have no intention of buying anything. It's just the thrill of making people think that you're rich. But these brothers had a plan that was way darker. On November 25th, the insurance agent made Cindy and Michael aware they had been approved for $100,000, but were waiting for the $300,000. So they had to do a few more checks on her financial information, but it should be approved within the next couple weeks. Well, at this point, Rudy and Anka went and rented a car with a large trunk with the intention of having it ready for Cindy as soon as the application went through. But then just a few days later, on the 30th of November, Michael was informed they needed to fill out an additional application to get the $300,000, so they had to wait a little longer. Therefore, Rudy went and canceled the car rental reservation. Now, if it's not clicking, think about this. When I said getting it ready for Cindy, they got a car with a large trunk because they were eager to get rid of this human being, just like that. When they heard that the application was going to be approved, they were going to throw her into this trunk and then do the unthinkable. And I can't wrap my brain around how cold someone would have to be to do this. On December 22nd, just one day before Cindy went missing, guess what happened? The insurance policy became effective. Now, you'd think that it would be super obvious if your wife just went missing or was found murdered right after you just took out a big life insurance policy. And by the way, it was actually double that $400,000. It was $800,000 because Michael's was set to kick in when Cindy died. He would be collecting close to $1 million if everything went according to plan. And the plan was Rudy would rent that car with the big trunk. Michael would rent a car too so that, no one would see Cindy's vehicle. He was driving the Subaru. Remember, he and Cindy drove her VW to get fixed. All that was part of his plan. Then he was going to convince Cindy to go with him somewhere, but then knock her unconscious and then meet his brother and Anka in front of a German restaurant in town. That was kind of weird. Like they specifically picked a German restaurant. And then they were going to go into the desert and kill Cindy, leave her out there and return the rentals and act like they had no idea what happened, but they didn't expect her to be found. They didn't expect things to come together so quickly or at all. Anka insisted she never saw Cindy being killed. She said she didn't see anything. She just assumed it happened once they drove to the desert and both Michael and Rudy got out of their cars and they told her to stay where she was and not look. So she didn't. But both brothers came back covered in blood. And we know that poor Cindy had no idea what was coming. She trusted her new husband. She was giving him a chance. And he led her right out there to the desert and brutally attacked her. Cindy's life ended in an act of sheer cruelty. And afterward, they drove that rental car back to the Motel 6, both of the rentals, where Anka and Rudy had been staying. And Michael and Rudy just showered. They put on fresh clothes. They cleaned up. They disposed of whatever evidence they needed to get rid of. And they just made their way to Bobby McGee's to establish an alibi. It sickened me when Anka said it only took the brothers 5 minutes to kill Cindy. That's how long they were gone before coming back covered in her blood, and that is horrific. Anka's confession filled in a lot of missing pieces. Detectives now had a clear picture of what happened to Cindy, but they needed more to make their case. This was just Anka's word, no evidence, so they pressed her even more. Remember the tire tracks at the crime scene, how they didn't match the Subaru that Michael had rented? Well, without physical evidence, the prosecution would just have to heavily rely on Anka's testimony, which isn't going to be that compelling. According to Anka, the answer was simple. Michael had deliberately damaged the tires on the Subaru after he realized that the police were onto them. Remember how at first he allowed them to search the apartment and the car early on before they gathered the tire tracks from the scene? Well, Michael was forward-thinking. On the night of December 25th, Christmas, He drove the Subaru out to the Salt River bottom, and he drove around erratically. He was making these hard turns. He was slamming on the brakes. All of this in an effort to change the tread of the tires so that they wouldn't be linked to the murder scene. It actually worked, because when he brought the car back to the rental agency, 2 of those tires had to be completely replaced because there were flat spots caused by his driving. So when the detectives went back to get those ink impressions, they didn't match the dirt at the scene, and that is pretty clever. Detectives confirmed this by speaking with the rental car clerk. He remembered Michael returning the car with severely worn tires. It was a meticulous move by Michael, but it wasn't enough to cover all of his tracks. The net was closing in on the Appel brothers, and they didn't even know it. The detectives had already been suspicious about the threatening message left on Cindy's machine. It sounded too deliberate, too calculated, and too rehearsed and scripted. But Anka revealed something. She told them it was all fake. Just another piece of this elaborate cover-up. She admitted Michael borrowed some money using the insurance policy as collateral, and the 3 of them flew to Illinois for Cindy's funeral on December 31st. But afterward, they took a little detour to Los Angeles, where they approached a random man they saw loitering outside of a seedy establishment, and they convinced him to make a phone call in exchange for a few dollars in cash. Anka admitted that she wrote down what Michael told her to, and the man read it. We know that none of them spoke fluent English. That's why it came out so sloppy and disjointed. And remember the way they were all laughing at the gravesite? Well, that evening, right after Michael had sat there and cried at Cindy's funeral, he told Anka that Cindy had signed her own death warrant when she signed those insurance papers. But he also said he regretted killing her. Really? Because in my mind, I did not believe it. He only regretted that detectives were closing in on them. He got to spend 3 months with this gorgeous, trusting, happy, amazing woman. And on top of that, he just snuffed out her life, taking that light away from everyone who loved her. He didn't deserve Cindy, and he didn't deserve to spend 1 more minute free. The investigators agreed, and they arrested both Michael and Rudy for first-degree murder. As the cuffs were placed on Michael, his arrogant demeanor finally cracked. The man who had exuded confidence and charm now just looked panicked. His carefully constructed image was crumbling. His girlfriend ratted him out, and she was offered immunity in exchange for testifying against him and his brother. When Kathy received the call, informing her that Michael and Rudy had been arrested, she felt this strange mix of emotions. She felt relief because Cindy's killers were finally being held accountable, but also sorrow because no amount of justice could bring her sister back. And it was sad how much she believed in the fairy tale that she was going to live happily ever after. Even with Michael and Rudy in custody, detectives knew the hard work was not even close to being over. The prosecution's case would hinge on just Anka's testimony. Without forensic evidence, the jury would have to believe her version of events, and the defense could paint her as a scorned lover, a liar, a jealous ex. So the prosecution was going to need more. And on January 9th, the police searched Cindy's apartment pursuant to a warrant. And this time, they could do a much more thorough search. They seized a number of items, including the brothers' shoes, a crossbow, business cards that led the police to various jewelry stores and car dealerships that the brothers visited on their shopping sprees. They also seized 2 rolls of film that contained pictures of, guess what? Michael wearing Reebok tennis shoes. He had acted like he was too good for tennis shoes, as though he only wore luxury brands. And maybe that's why he deliberately chose to wear these Reeboks to throw the investigation off, and he got rid of them. But when they looked at the exact same style and compared them to the pictures of the tread on even Cindy's face and also in the dirt, they were a perfect match, and more evidence came to light. While the brothers were in jail, Anka thought it would be a good idea to write to Rudy several times. And these letters contained various incriminating statements. Maybe she did it on purpose to help the police. I don't know. But it corroborated her version of events. The letters were seized, and Michael also sent Rudy a note in German that translated in part, quote, "I have a guy who's getting out in 2 to 4 days, and then will be free in 1 to 2 weeks. It won't matter if the police have anything or not. We're in jail and won't be able to have done that. So don't do anything, okay? Because when a woman is dead, the same thing will have happened. we'll be free and I'll have the money because the police won't be able to do anything, end quote. Now, I have to tell you, when I read that, I read it a few times. I wasn't sure what he was trying to say. It wasn't very clear to me, but I guess he's thinking that they're going to get out on bail because otherwise this note makes no sense. Of course, it matters that the police have evidence, so I'm guessing they were going to try to flee. But this note was intercepted by a fellow inmate and he turned it over to the police. And after the police interviewed this inmate, they obtained and executed a search warrant for Michael and Rudy's adjoining cells. The police seized other letters the brothers had sent, which included even more incriminating evidence. And then Michael and Rudy were tried separately. Even though there was no DNA or blood connecting Michael to the crime scene, the prosecution had something else on their side: Michael's arrogance. Michael considered himself way more intelligent than everyone around him, and he made a bold and even reckless decision to testify in his own defense. And I always say, of course they did. It was a move that even his defense attorneys advised against, but Michael's ego couldn't resist the chance to try to talk his way out of all of these charges. On the stand, he painted himself as a loving husband, a devoted partner to Cindy. He claimed to have no knowledge of the murder, insisting that he had just been out to dinner with Rudy and Unca that night that Cindy disappeared. But this performance, it definitely did not go over well, especially not on cross-examination. The prosecution confronted Michael with one key piece of evidence that just blew his credibility: the photograph of him wearing that pair of Reebok tennis shoes. When Michael was initially being questioned by his attorney, he denied owning Reebok tennis shoes. He acted like the brand was below him. But the photograph taken weeks before Cindy's murder showed him wearing the exact same shoes. It was undeniable. It was a match. The prosecution methodically laid out their case, presenting both Michael and Rudy as calculated killers who manipulated Cindy for financial gain. They highlighted the insurance policies that Michael had taken out on Cindy, totaling nearly $1 million, and how the policies went into effect just a day before her murder. I mean, come on, it's kind of obvious. Unca Dorn's testimony provided a twisted account of the brothers' premeditated plan, from targeting Cindy at Bobby McGee's to taking her into the desert on December 23rd. The jury also heard about that staged phone call that was orchestrated by Michael, Rudy, and Unca to shift suspicion away from them. The prosecution told the jury that Cindy was never more than a means to an end for Michael and Rudy. They didn't love her. They saw her as a paycheck. But of course, the defense tried to once again shift the blame onto guess who? Unca, actually, suggesting that she was more involved in the murder than she let on. And you know what? She could have been. They painted her as an unreliable witness who had lied to protect herself. Clearly, she went on all the shopping sprees. She was, in fact, Michael's girlfriend the whole time. To the defense, it showed that she wanted Cindy dead too. But the jury just wasn't convinced. Unca's testimony was detailed, it was consistent, and it was corroborated by the evidence detectives gathered. And Michael's own actions, his lies, his arrogance, and his desperation only strengthened the prosecution's case. And on June 1st of 1990, the jury returned their verdict. Michael and Rudy Appels were found guilty of first-degree murder. And during the sentencing phase, the brutality of Cindy's murder weighed heavily on the court. The judge sentenced both brothers to death. He emphasized the cold, calculated nature of their crime. So they were not getting out like Michael thought. For Cindy's family, it was a bittersweet moment. Justice had been served. But the void left by Cindy's absence could never be filled. And then, I hate to even have to say this, I hate when these things happen, 19 years later, in 2009, Rudy's death sentence was overturned because tests showed he had a low IQ. The court determined that he was intellectually disabled, which used to be referred to, I'm just going to tell you, it used to be called mental retardation. We do not use that anymore to label it that way. But it meant that his IQ made him ineligible for the death penalty under federal law. So his sentence was commuted to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And for Cindy's family, that was very difficult. Kathy has an entire website that she runs, and she's actually writing a book about Cindy's murder. And on the website, she expressed her thoughts about all this. Her family always believed that Rudy was just as culpable as Michael, regardless of his intelligence, but they had no choice but to accept the court's ruling. As of today, Michael Appels remains on death row in Arizona. His fate is unchanged. but who knows how long the wait will be until he's put to death, if ever. For Kathy, the trial and the sentencing were only part of the journey. In the years that followed her sister's murder, she struggled with overwhelming grief and anger. Losing Cindy wasn't just the loss of a sibling, it was the loss of her very best friend, her other half. In interviews, Kathy described how difficult the first 25 years were. Every Christmas was a painful reminder of the holiday season that Cindy never got to celebrate again. But over time, Kathy found strength in honoring Cindy's memory. She refused to let Michael and Rudy take anything more from her and her family. Today, Kathy talks about Cindy with a sense of peace. The pain will never fully go away, but she's found a way to keep her sister's spirit alive, especially during the holidays. The holidays were the hardest. Every Christmas, Kathy was reminded of the devastating day that she had boarded that flight to Illinois alone, leaving behind the ticket and the note for Cindy, hoping that she would show up. Instead, Christmas Eve became the day that Cindy's body was found. She found herself in this cycle of what ifs. What if Cindy had never met Michael? What if she had seen through his lies? What if Kathy would have pushed harder to convince Cindy to stay away from him? One of the ways that Kathy has kept Cindy's spirit alive is by actually embracing Christmas again. Kathy decorates her home the same way she knows Cindy would, hanging ornaments that reminds her of their childhood and playing the Christmas music that they once loved together. It's still hard. She says she knows Cindy would be happy, though, that she's seeing them laugh and celebrate and living their life to the fullest like she always did. Cindy's story is heartbreaking. It's a reminder of how quickly life can change, how easily trust can be betrayed. But it's also a story of resilience because her family refused to let tragedy define them. Kathy's work in sharing Cindy's story has brought awareness of the dangers of manipulation and the importance of recognizing red flags in relationships. Cindy's legacy isn't about what happened to her, it's about the lessons her story can teach us. In the end, Kathy sums up Cindy's legacy best when she says, she was a dreamer, a lover, a believer in people. That's what made her so special. And while the world lost her far too soon, the love she gave us will last forever. So my message to you that we can take is to say something to your family members. Pick up the phone, send a text. Remember that life can end in ways we would never expect. It's sad but true. We're not promised the next day or the next hour. And I will see you in my very next video. Thank you all so much. Bye.